viewing on this symbol up here is view all, so that puts everything you've made into the centers it on the screen. If you want to zoom it a little bit smaller or zoom it larger, you can use these. If you want to zoom a particular area, the one just to the right of the view all, if you click on that, then you can zoom in on a very small area, smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And then to get back to the whole thing, the easiest thing to do is just say view all. So now we've got some geometry on the screen that we created in this program. If you had brought geometry in from another program, all of these commands would work the same in terms of creating information on how to cut this. Let's say we want to engrave this lettering. Let's do 3 different things here. There are multiple ways of using the laser. You can just follow a single line, and depending on how you set the power and speed, that could either just be marking that line like a wood burn, or it could be cutting all the way through the material. If you just want to mark it, you move pretty quickly and run a low power. If you want to cut through, you'd move more slowly and run a higher power on the laser. So the way that you would do that, let's first change the color of this, because the different layers and the different things you want to do are defined by color on this machine. So let's make this be, I selected this and I come down here to the color palette. Let's change the color of that to blue, the color of the text to red, the color of the outline, let's make that green. So now we have over here, we've got 4 layers. We can set each one of those up to be a different kind of cut. And we can adjust them in order. Say I wanted the red layer to be last. I could just drag it down and it would move to last. Usually what you do is if you're doing details on the inside and then cutting it out, you would have the cutout be the last thing. So the green layer we're going to put down at the bottom. So if I click on the black layer, which is these 2 circles, okay, I'm going down here, this is the black layer. I want the output to be yes. If we're going to cut through this, for this example, we'll use 1/4-inch plywood. So I know that the cutting speed on 1/4-inch plywood is 9 millimeters a second and a power of 95 millimeters. 95%. So I'm turning the output on, setting the speed. Blowing should always be turned on, and my processing mode is cutting. So I'm going to cut those 2 circles out. I don't need the laser through mode on. And I would say, okay, and now those are set to cut through. That's the first thing we're going to do. The next thing I want to do is just mark that elliptical circle, that elliptical shape. So again, double click on the blue, yes to output. My speed here would be 100, so over 10 times what we were before, and my power would be all the way down to 10%. I just want to mark that on the surface of the wood. So the 3rd layer, I'm going to set up for a different kind of marking. When you set it for cut, it just follows the line that you've made. If you set it to scan, then it's going to fill in any closed areas. So if we look at the text, let's zoom in on that. We'll use that. Oops, I need to cancel this. Let's zoom in on the text. Okay. Double click on this to open that up again. So output yes, speed in millimeters per second, we're bumping it up to 200. Blowing is yes. We're using the scan mode. So these are all closed shapes. It's going to fill in all of those letters. In other words, burn in the center of those. And we're going to use 200. We could use 10% again. I'm going to bump this up to 15% to make them a little bit deeper. And this is a different kind of different choices here because we're in the scan mode. So we want unprocess here, X swing here, interval here. We typically set to 0.2. That's the most efficient way to do it. If you had some really fine detail, you might want to make that smaller, but interval is essentially the scan is going back and forth across like this, and interval is how far it goes down between each pass. So if you had the interval bigger than the width that was being burned, it would give it a striped look. If you had it narrower than the width of the burn, it essentially overburns it. It burns it twice. So we're happy with these. This is our typical setting for a scan would be 200 millimeters per second, something like 15%, 0.2 of a millimeter for the interval, and say OK. And then the very last thing we're going to do is cutting around the outside. If we can use the same numbers that we used for the first one, which were 9 and 95, and we're setting both minimum and maximum power to the same. We only have one tube in here, so we're only setting it up for one, not using laser through. The reason some of these are set differently is the machine remembers how this color was used before by someone else. So if it's not giving you you need to check through all of the settings to make sure that it's set up the way you want it to be.